Hello, my name is Morteza Rahimi, and this is my attempt at assignment number 1 for ACIT 4640 in winter 2024. I want to quickly start off by giving a brief introduction into what we're trying to do today, and that is to use Terraform to deploy a VPC that will have two subnets, one public, one private, and each one of those will then have an EC2 instance. Again, one public, one private. We apply different security groups to each to enforce different policies. With the public one, we want to be able to access from anywhere using HTTP and SSH, whereas with the private one, we only want to be able to access it from within the VPC. So in this case, this public EC2 instance is going to act as our bastion host. And there's this internet gateway through which the VPC has access to the outer internet and the routing table that sort of enables that all. Okay, jumping right into it, this is my previous sort of testing it, but let's clear all that. We're in WSL in a directory called assignment 1, and we have this main.tf file that has all of our instructions for generating the infrastructure that we want using Terraform. I'll come back to this and go more in detail, but for right now, let's actually test and see if this works. So the first thing that we do is we are going to do the Terraform initializing, and that will sort of check that all the plugins and everything is available. That's successful, so then we can move on to do the planning, which is it looks at what currently our infrastructure is and what we want to deploy and sort of sees, are we changing anything, are we adding anything, are we destroying anything? And in this case, we have nothing, we want to add 13 sort of resources. Okay, so let's go ahead and now that that didn't throw up any errors, actually apply it and deploy our infrastructure. We'll say yes, and this might take a second or two, so I'm just going to pause and sort of come back to it. Alrighty, so that successfully deployed everything. Now, we have a public instance and a private instance, and the public instance has a DNS. So I want to test a few things quickly. And in order to do that, I'm going to use an SSH agent because I want to be able to use the same PEM key from within the public EC2 instance to get into our private instance and make sure that that works as intended. Okay, SSH add, and there's this PEM key that got generated as part of this whole deploying process. And now let's use it, sort of referenced here by that -a, to get into our public EC2 instance. I'm just going to copy and paste this first time, so we give it permission. Okay, perfect, we're in. Now, one thing that we did as part of this was to deploy nginx as part of the deployment process. So let's make sure that that is working as intended. And it is. Perfect. Last thing to do before we exit the public EC2 instance is let's see if we can gain access to this private EC2 instance. That should only be accessible from within, and it only has a private IP. We don't generate a public IP address for it. So using the agent, we can just use that -a to use the same PEM key and get into our private instance. Again, it's the first time. Give it permission, and perfect. We are in here. Fantastic. I think we can now exit the private instance and exit the public instance and actually go and jump into the details quickly. Maybe I'll just do it this way. Yeah, so what we do here is we configure Terraform to use the AWS provider, and we sort of create a variable for the region. When we want to sort of default it to use US West 2. We used this in the labs previously, and I stuck with that. We're sort of setting up a bunch of variables that we'll be using throughout. So I decided to, and I don't know if this was the best way to do it, but I had a public availability zone and a private one that I set for each of my EC2 instances, and then they sort of have different CIDR blocks for the public and private subnet and the base. And this is the SSH key where you'll see further down we utilize to create a local SSH key. Yeah, so here we sort of set up our provider AWS and we create a VPC resource and we give it the base CIDR block that we used here. And we enable DNS host names and support because we'll use that for our public EC2 instance. Then we create our public subnet, connect it to the VPC that we just made, and assign it the public subnet CIDR blocks and the public availability zones. And then map public IP on launch. We say true for this one as opposed to here where we say false for our private subnet. Again, both connected to the same VPC, but given a different CIDR block and different availability zone. Then we create the internet gateway for our VPC, routing table, same, and sort of do the bits here. Now here's, we create two security groups, one public and one private. For the public, we sort of allow SSH and HTTP from anywhere. And then egress for outside, -1 with defaults to everything access. Whereas with the private, which we assign to the other EC2 instance, we only give access from within the VPC blocks. This is where that is sort of enforced. Here we generate a SSH key pair locally, and then we use that to sort of set up a public key that we give to AWS to create our AWS key here, using that local. Here we get the most recent Ubuntu version, and now we create a public instance and a private instance using that image. And we sort of here set the subnet to be the private, whereas this one's the public. Security group, this one gets public, this one gets private, and they both use the same key. And then we sort of outputted the IP addresses. And yeah, that's how that all went. Thank you very much.